Now, Shamima Begum's hopes of returning to Britain were done no favours today. Her husband gave an interview in which he refused to condemn ISIS beheadings or the use of Yazidi sex slaves. Dutch-born Yago Riedijk married Shamima Begum days after she arrived in Syria as a 15-year-old in 2015. The couple had 3 children together, all of whom subsequently died. Riedijk is now living in a detention centre in northern Syria, but he told his interviewer that he hoped to see the caliphate return. Begum's British citizenship was revoked by the then Home Secretary Sajid Javid. Well, with me is the director of the counter-extremist EMAN Network, Mohamed Hineidi. Mohamed, thanks so much for joining us today. I do appreciate it. I mean, this individual does not seem to have done Shamima Begum any great favours, but he does seem to be speaking frankly, candidly and honestly.
Yes, you're right, Colin, definitely. I mean, Shamima herself has not done herself any favours. She justified the Manchester Arena attacks back in 2015 by saying that it was basically ISIS's retaliation for the coalition's bombing of their territory that they controlled in Iraq and Syria. So her husband now is coming out and saying that I don't condone any attacks in the West, but I still believe in a caliphate. So that's basically what ISIS believes in, just without the violence. So basically, Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is active is active in Britain, which is active in Australia, in the US, in Canada, but it's spanned across basically the entire Muslim world. I don't believe, however, that he does. I don't believe that he's genuine about his. That I don't believe, that he doesn't believe in violence, because at the end of the day, he refused to comment on the Yazidi sex slaves, and he refused to comment on ISIS's attacks against other Muslims in Syria and Iraq. And the same thing for Shamima.
Calibrated, Mohamed, almost, didn't he? He's almost miscalibrated. If he was going to completely reinvent himself and present himself as somebody thoroughly de-radicalised, he only went halfway.
Well, definitely, Colin. I mean, at the end of the day, he's been in prison in an SDF-controlled territory in northern Syria. So 6 years on, 6 years after the so-called caliphate fell, he still doesn't have any remorse. Neither does his so-called wife. At the end of the day, they have both failed as humans. She has failed as a British citizen. She's failed as a mother. She gave birth to 3 children, all of whom have died. That is extremely tragic, and it's absolutely horrendous. She's failed as a so-called Muslim. She was part of the morality police in Syria. She would beat women up who were not covered well enough, according to her standards. So there were also reports that she would physically stitch suicide vests to the bodies of suicide bombers, so that if they had last-minute thoughts, it would detonate. So I'm not sure people who want to have her back to the UK, she does set an example. At the end of the day, the ISIS that we were used to, the ISIS that we knew, existed in Syria and Iraq in 2014 and 2015. It controlled swaths of territory. It controlled 10 million people. But today, Colin, where does ISIS exist? It controls territory in Afghanistan. Using Shamima as an example, you set an example for her, so that we don't have hundreds, if not thousands thousands more Shamimas in the future in Afghanistan.
Is there no counter-narrative to that, which says, actually, and I've argued this before, though actually listening to you just now rather dissuades me from my point of view, which is that you could use her, she's a revolting individual, but she could be, pragmatically speaking, she could be useful. If it could be demonstrated that she was sincere in resiling from her previous beliefs, then you could present her as part of a de-radicalisation programme. She could become a sort of poster girl for de-radicalisation, touring schools, etc., saying, don't follow this path, this is what happened to me, look how badly wrong it went, and actually I now choose to lead a different kind of life.
I mean, I completely understand that narrative. I completely understand that argument, Colin. Many would argue that she was young when she made those decisions, but that did result in the deaths of 3 of her children. She did commit crimes in Syria and Iraq. If she was to stand trial, she would stand trial in Iraq. She is originally she's got Bangladeshi heritage. The Bangladeshi government has stated that if she was to step foot in Bangladesh, she would be sentenced. She would be sentenced to death. They've got a zero tolerance approach to terrorism and to extremism. I'm not saying that she should be sentenced to death, but she should be tried in the courts of the countries where she committed the crimes. I don't think she should be given the opportunity to be another. She was a poster girl for Daesh, for ISIS. She should not be the poster girl for the counter radicalization campaign in the future. ISIS will be coming back. It is already back in Afghanistan. Members of the Afghan National Forces are already flocking to ISIS, and that's part of the whole Islamist idea that we're trying to combat here. And we shouldn't be using her as part of any narrative in the future. She should pay for what she has done.
Well, I tell you what, Mohammed, the story of what's happening with ISIS in Afghanistan is a fascinating one. It's a story for another time, though, I'm afraid, but really appreciate your thoughts on Shamima Begum and her husband today, Mohamed Hineidi.